Man, the patch notes just came out and I'm actually more excited about those than I am for the Sisters of Twilight, which is a statement I never thought I would make. There's also perhaps some interesting implications here, though I'll let you make up your own mind about those bits, and we will leave them for the end of the video. Before we get started though, again, I need to congratulate whoever writes these patch notes. They are always hilarious, and this is probably their best job yet. Like, I actually laughed out loud multiple times while reading this. Anyways, we'll get started with all the boring stuff we expected. The Wood Elf fixes we kind of mostly knew about already, but getting the details was still awesome to see. There is one sad bit in my eyes. Spites are now exclusively just traits, we've been confirmed, so we can finally remove any hope of ever seeing those as units. To tie this into my previous video, I think that really puts the nail in the coffin for any more Azrai packs. There's pretty much nothing left now. But besides that, everything else looks utterly brilliant. There were some surprises in there. I think the military and garrison buildings being combined, as well as the fact that most new buildings provide income, were kind of unexpected. They also got quicker access to public order buildings, which, remember, now affects your income in a pretty dramatic way as well. And outposts instead have been nerfed a little bit further compared to other locations, but I actually still like that. It's kind of cool to see the Wood Elves get so focused on building tall rather than building wide. We're also apparently getting a bunch of new dilemmas, followers, and incidents, which is welcome news as the Wood Elves have always struggled on that front. The Oak of Ages no longer unlocks confederations, now instead it unlocks missions for confederations, which I'm really happy to see CA continuing the theme of unique confederation requirements. Lastly, some other neat details that I like. The Wood Elves getting a high power but stationary ambush stance is wonderful, and I'm really glad that CA resisted the urge to give yet another faction mobile ambush. Also, the Wood Elves are a bit more diplomatic now, which fits their lore quite a bit better. So for example, they can now work out with the Dark Elves quite a bit easier, and they have completely unrestricted trade with others. But there's an incredible amount of work done for the other factions as well, and that's where a lot of my enthusiasm comes from. The new public order system is something I've brought up multiple times in previous videos, but I want to highlight it again. The new system sounds infinitely more interesting than the previous method, which was completely irrelevant unless you hit -100. This also ties in really well with the new economic tweaks, which both tie in with the newer slower growth system, so expanding outwards now sounds like it will require honest to goodness planning, as opposed to the previous system of just conquering absolutely anything you could see. I'm also really happy to see that Footlords finally got the love they always deserved, while monstrous units and cavalry can no longer just punt aside infantry when it's time to leave. This will probably go a little bit of ways towards balancing out the units, as previously Doomstacks of single entity monsters was just a method of completely rendering the enemy's army worthless. It's unfortunately too late to remove Teclises, Lokirs, and Wolfric's completely unlawful mounts, but hopefully it means that we don't kind of see that nonsense in the future. Footlords can stay Footlords as they always should have been. Then of course there's the new territories added in by the map, all 4 of which are new forests. Apart from the fact that I'm glad we're getting new forests, I'm also really happy to see the map continuing to increase in density. I don't think many players realize just how much has been added to the map since launch. On the forums, Rick, I hope I pronounced your name right, dude, I'm sorry, measured it and found a whopping 58 territories have been added, which makes me really hopeful that a Game 3 combined map might actually encompass the entire world. And speaking of changes to the map, one that I found particularly interesting for how highly it was listed was the change to the Marshes of Madness, which changed from a fairly loreful vampire counts instead to the greenskins. Why make such a change? Well, it was done to spare Malagor from suffering attrition on turn 1. Oh, whatever, a small change like that gets you excited, you're thinking? Well, on its own, no, such a change wouldn't warrant a response, but there's a big thing in here that seems custom tailored for the Beastmen. Let's look to the AI section for a moment, and here we see that the AI is now being coded to not try and resettle raised territories immediately. On its own, this would seem like a very detrimental change to any person not playing as a Horde faction. And what I mean is, like, AI hordes don't get frustrated if the settlement they just raised pops back up the next turn. This is benefit exclusively for people playing a Horde faction such as the Beastmen, Warriors of Chaos, or Norska. Okay, sure, but 2 small things don't... Let me just stop you right there, champ. We're not done here. CA also changed the behavior of how units can now hide in forests, and in case you're thinking, whatever, that's just because the Wood Elves use forests a lot, it should be noted, literally nothing in the changes affects the Wood Elves 1 iota. This change promotes a few things. Chariots can now hide in forests, unlike before, as can certain monstrous infantry and shorter single entity monsters. Things that cannot are artillery, war machines, tall monsters, or flying entities. And while these changes might help a little on some factions, they will help big time on a faction like the Beastmen, who need to hide in forests in order to ambush their enemies. So the Beastmen have had their battle mechanics improved, their campaign mechanics improved, and even got a fix for one of their legendary lords. Like, I'm not going to say this is concrete evidence or anything, but for those of us who are expecting them in the next DLC, this kinda does line up nicely with that. Speaking of the next DLC, there is something outside of all these patch notes that we'll talk about at the very end of this video, but try to remember all of what we just spoke about. Maybe like write it down on a post-it note or something. Just to wrap up, one last thing I'm really happy with on the patch notes, the updates to older characters. Like, I know everyone and their dog is already talking about Helm and Gorst, and that's fair. His update to corpse carts to give them raised dead and plus 15 armors to zombies, they should give him a pretty loreful campaign experience. But he's actually not the one I'm most impressed with. That would actually go to Archaon. His previous flat bonus for Chaos Warriors has been removed and instead replaced with a trait that gives a 3% bonus damage per level. I might be mistaken in saying this, but I'm pretty sure we've never had a trait that affects units on a per level basis like this, which is really awesome on its own, but also for what it can do for modders. Sigvald was also given pretty substantial tweaks. His bonus to characters is gone, which is a little disheartening. I found that fit his character very well. Instead, he provides Rage to Marauders, which changes to Berserk at rank 7. His Marauders also lose their +3 rank bonus, but in exchange, all the units in his army get Strider, which is a much better trade-off. His skill, Unworthy, now grants Fear in addition to Terror, which is, I mean, fine, I guess. I don't know. It always kind of struck me as a weird combination. However, Marked by Slaanesh has now been updated so that it doesn't provide as much leadership. It's down to 5 from 9, but instead now grants Charmed Attacks, which fits it substantially better, I would argue. Orion and Durthu also now have revamped skill lines, which is pretty good to see, you know, especially considering what we're going for. And Tretch Craventail is now much more focused on Storm Vermin, but also much more focused on being a massive coward, which are awesome references to Clan Rictus and Tretch respectively. There's also a smattering of updates for the Dwarves, Vampire Counts, and Lizardmen in there, though nothing that really struck out as me as being too amazing compared to the previous stuff. But as a quick aside, I mentioned that we got a hint about the next DLC. Well, this comes to us thanks to Will Wright, the same fellow who did the interview about the Wood Elf update from yesterday. When asked on the live stream about the possibility of a DLC containing only Game 1 races in Game 2, he shot down the idea immediately. I know most of us were already expecting a Game 2 versus Game 1 race, but for any holdout still thinking it was going to be Neferata versus Dwarves or any other combination of Game 1 races, you can go ahead and abandon that line of thinking now. One last aside, CA thanked various modders in the patch notes at the very end for the mechanics that were directly replaced by the upcoming DLC and patch. I just wanted to say that I thought that was a really classy move on CA's part, because it has to be a little disheartening as a modder that seeing your work basically get made irrelevant, right? But being thanked for your contributions directly costed CA absolutely nothing, but the fact that they went through the effort to include it speaks volumes to their character, so like, really good job there. Anyways, to recap everything in case you've just shot down at the end of the video, it was an awesome update in my eyes. It seems like the Beastmen and the Chaos got some extra loving, which I like, and CA seems to acknowledge the contributions of the modding community, as well as the fact that we now know that there's a guaranteed Game 2 race in the next DLC. Anyways, tomorrow is of course the release of the DLC, so don't forget to make a blank load order because almost everything's going to break. I'll get to playing with the DLC over the next few days, and I'll try to keep everyone in the loop over the status of major mods, much like what we did when the Grim the Grand released. But in the meantime, I want to thank you so much for watching, have fun playing, and I'll see you all soon.